people have to get comfortable setting an agreement in the beginning of their workplace experience. As human beings, we set these expectations of like, oh, but my manager, they will advocate for me or they should advocate for me. That's the expectation. They have to actually answer questions. And it may be a question of which conference was it? What was the date, right? That starts tricking people. So there has to be a verification aspect of it as well. What I love most about this project is it's not just about me. It's not just about my ideas. It's not just about the members or the other advisors. It's how do we begin to co-create with the community in which we live in?
Well, good morning. So I have Netta with us, who is leading voice in diversity, equity, and inclusion field, whose soaring audience engagement was doubtless a key factor in Forbes naming her as one of the top 7 anti-racism consultants in the world. Netta was featured in CIO View's publication as the 10 most influential Black women in business to follow in 2021. Netta is also helping to build the first inclusive city in over 100 years, known as Telosa. The project has a target population of 5 million people by 2015. It's funny how it's hardest to take the first step, but Netta is taking it to an extra mile where she's working on creating a city. That's inspiring, Netta. So let's welcome Netta on 10 Minutes of Hiring Wisdom, where she will tell us about what it's like being a woman, being a Black woman, and just fighting against odds and paving her way towards success. Hi, Netta. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, Netta. So, Netta, the work that you've done so far is very inspiring. Hats off. You're definitely an inspiration to a lot of women out there. So thank you so much on behalf of so many other women who are struggling, who are finding it hard to move into a career. But you're definitely an inspiration to so many women out there.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Of course. So, Netta, first question. You've spoken a lot about gender equality. You've spoken a lot about women empowerment. So I would love to understand from your perspective, which is that how can workers at certain companies stand up against racial injustice that might be occurring within companies? So at first, it used to be very out there. Now it's still there, but it's subtle. It's discreet. So how do you pinpoint, like if it's your boss, how do you tell them, oh, that's not okay? Because I mean, of course, you'd be scared of losing your job. So how do you put an end to it from your own experience?
Yeah. It's scary, right? It's a scary thing because the reality is, like you said, people have families to feed. It's their livelihood. When you think about your job, you think about, like, I have bills to pay. I have other things to do with that, right? You don't want to jeopardize that. But what I typically say is people have to get comfortable setting an agreement in the beginning of their workplace experience. So, right, I think many of us, we get so excited. Yes, I got a role. I'm in it. We don't even ask any questions about, okay, so what is your work style? Here's my work style. What's the agreement that we're setting here to make sure that we're always aligned? What type of support can you provide to me and make sure that I'm on the right path, right? Who else would you recommend me surrounding myself with, in whether that's a VP and above, right? That can really kind of mentor and coach me through the process. So oftentimes we don't ask those types of questions. And I tell folks that I work with and clients that I work with all the time, ask these pressing questions. No one is going to be more interested in your career than you are, right?
I like that.
And I think because I am a firm believer, expectations are very different than agreements. So as human beings, we set these expectations of like, oh, but my manager, they will advocate for me or they should advocate for me. That's the expectation. But there was no agreement that that would be happening, right? And so we have to set that platform in the beginning.
I like that. I think a follow-up question for that would be, Netta, we've seen the pandemic. We've seen a lot of people laid off. Sometimes the people that you initially made the agreement with might no longer be a part of that company. So you were working under them. They might have gotten a new opportunity. They might have been laid off. So how do you set new agreements with the new person that might be above you or might be working with you? Because I think change is so constant these days. So it's hard to set and understand those agreements.
Right. I think it's the same process, right? It's whoever that new person that you're reporting to, you do the same thing. But it's also, taking a step back in the infant stages when you're setting that agreement, write everything down, right? literally in the workplace, I like to call it like workplace diary is extremely important, right? Write it all down. And then that way, because there are changes that happen, you may not have your manager anymore. You now have to go to a new team. That way, you have everything written down. You're like, hey, I'm going to share with you some of the agreements that me and my former manager made. I just want to ensure that I'm still aligned. I'm still on that path. And please let me know if there are things that I need to alter here. Can we have a conversation about this? Now you have a foundation, you have a baseline, as opposed to, oh, well, I talked to my manager before, and then you get some of those leaders that are not as impactful or effective or with bad behavior saying, okay, well, I'm your new manager. So this is a new way, you know. And that's entirely fine, but at least it's been documented and that person sees, oh crap, this person takes their career very serious.
I like that. I think transparency is key, and you can't go wrong with over communicating. I think under communicating is when the issue occurs. So thank
Mhm.
you so much for sharing that, Netta.
Yeah.
My another question for you, Netta, would be: is you're all about inclusivity. You work with a lot of companies. You've consulted with a lot of companies, telling them on how to make their workplace more inclusive. So, what are some of the top strategies or tips you have for companies that are working towards making their workplace more inclusive?
Yeah, there are so many. But one of the things that I always ask all DEI leaders when I'm consulting with them or CEOs or chief people officers is, do you think DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is just the people team, the HR team's role, or the DEI team's role? Or do you think it's every single employee's role? When I ask that question, they all say, well, it's every single employee. Then my next follow up question is, how are you tracking that? Every single employee is actually driving a level of impact. I'm a firm believer that DEI will not work unless every single individual within the company is actually working on it. And so that's the biggest tip that I provide all of my clients. It has to be everyone and it has to be measurable. So that means an organization is going to have to invest in a platform, which I've created. But they have to invest in a platform that is actually going to be able to measure and track the impact of every single employee. It spits out the results for that manager, right? To just copy and paste and put in a performance review. And it then needs to be tied to the performance review as well. In this, that's the real work, right? Like that's the non-performative work. Of course, there are so many different tips and strategies that I also share, but I would say that's the biggest key one.
Okay, follow-up question and then last question. So follow-up question is, Nara, what are some of the key metrics? You mentioned that you made a platform for that specifically, but would be very curious to know what are some of the key metrics that you can measure to see how well people are doing when it comes to DEI? What are some of the, like, how exactly do you measure it and how do the results that are produced show certain patterns?
Yeah. Well, I love that, and thank you for asking it. Nice question. So I created. Not only did I create the application, but I also created a framework. The framework and what you're talking about would also be called key performance indicators. Many people know that
KPIs.
as KPIs. And the first one would be recruiting and retention. The next is growth and development, and the last is branding and engagement. Recruiting and retention, an example or a goal under that. So there are many goals under that, but one could be an employee attended a conference or several conferences throughout the year. And all I ask is that an employee only takes on one goal for the entire year. So it's like you have the entire year to do it, but imagine if every single person in the organization is doing it organically. There's going to be an increase in retention and attracting talents. There's going to be an increase in growth and development because now there's a total focus. There's specific goals to that, and then also branding engagement. It's those teams that have seen the impact of their efforts now they're sharing it not only internally at a stand up, but also externally, right? So, like, we take an engineering team that may have said, oh my goodness, before we had this platform, before we had this framework, we lacked in representation or we lacked in women identifying representation. once we got onto this framework and we started to measure the impact of all of our efforts and we actually completed our goals, we see an organic increase. And that is so telling. Like I was saying before, many organizations, they're not effectively measuring that. So they're not able to see the output of that. Also, this application, in order for an employee to actually close out, they have to actually answer questions. And it may be a question of which conference was it? What was the date, right? That starts tricking people. So there has to be a verification aspect of it as well. That has been so impactful. And that's an application that we use internally at Uncork right now. I'm so proud of the organization, so proud of the CEO, Gary Haberman, for saying, hey, I'm going to be the first to put my DEI KPI into this application. I think that is what is so, impactful. So really excited for that, and we're now taking it to market and ensuring that other companies have the access to measure the impact and also drive that level of accountability that they're looking for.
Wow, that sounds absolutely amazing. And I think if each and every one of us is accountable for ourselves, it's going to be a ripple effect essentially. I think everyone will start getting on board, and
Mhm.
the difference will be multiplied by thousands of people who are in it for the DEI. So that sounds absolutely amazing, Netta. Last and final question, Netta. So please tell me about the city that you're currently working on. How is that going, and where did the inspiration come from?
Yeah. Well, City of Tolosa is going to be one. It's a massive project. I'm blessed to be on that project, and I will tell you the background to that is I had to speak in the Hamptons, based in New York, and for an organization called Feely, which is focused on female founders, and so I spoke on panel, and there was a woman that watched me speak, and she was so inspired. She came up to me after and she said, Netta, you have to be the DEI advisor on this project. I am connected to the former CEO of Walmart and NBA owner of the Timberwolves, and I want to connect with him. And that's huge. And I'm like, so what is it? And she's like, well, you get to build a new city. I was like, city or neighborhood? Like, what are you talking here, right? Like, neighborhood or city? Like, two different things, right? Existing neighborhood, or she's like, no, not a brand new city. And it just shows like the women empowerment aspect of it too. She doesn't know me. She doesn't know what I'm capable of, but she was led and she was moved by the things that I was saying, on at the event and on that platform. And that in itself is women empowerment. So yeah, Tolosa, all in all, is an incredible project. We're building, like I said, this new city from scratch, and I'm really trying to advise on how do we bring in and ensure that it's inclusive from the foundational stage. What I love most about this project is it's not just about me. It's not just about my ideas. It's not just about the members that or the other advisors, the foundational advisors. It's how do we begin to co-create with the community in which we live in? How do we begin to co-create to ensure that we're bringing in all voices, we're understanding the benefits that folks are looking for and what will really drive them to come into the city? How do we start hitting on topics around healthcare and education, the things that people are really passionate about? And how do we build those alliances and those partnerships as well with various organizations that focus on these efforts as well. So it's been an incredible journey thus far. I think one of the most telling things for me in starting a project is the team, the people that you're working with. And I tell you that the people in which I'm working with, it's like family. It's like a family relationship, and so welcoming and open. And it's like, hey, what do you think? What do you think of this idea? And we're always bouncing ideas off of each other. And I think that's the beauty of growth, and that's the type of innovation that we want to see within the city as well.
Wow. That sounds amazing. I think especially working with people who are on a similar mission to make such a big difference is just super inspiring. But other than that, Netta, our time is up. You were definitely a breath of fresh air. You are inspiring. The impact that you're making on this world the impact that you're making on so many women out there just by creating a workforce that's more focused on women empowerment, that's more focused on equity, diversity, will make such a big difference in so many women's lives who are trying to break into a career towards success. Thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing your wonderful, wonderful journey.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.